Welcome to Doctors Unbound, your show devoted to doctors who are, well, unbound by physician stereotypes. Get a behind-the-scenes look at doctors that are breaking the mold and breaking into the worlds of technology, writing, investing, politics, just to name a few. This is Doctors Unbound, where you'll hear from experts with the insights to help you go to the next level. Let's get this show started. Here is your host, Dr. Dave Georgescu.
Welcome to another episode of the Doctors Unbound podcast. You could say this is an international edition of the show. I've noticed the show has been getting downloads from Australia, Germany, New Zealand, India, just to name a few countries out there. Thank you so much to my international listeners. I do appreciate you very much as well. I really feel that medicine is a global community, and technology like this, like podcasting, is really helping to bring us all closer together. So thank you very much for that. Today's guest is a physician with an international pedigree. He completed his medical training in Europe, then traveled to Japan for research and immersed himself in the culture there. He eventually came to the U.S., where he continued his research, eventually got an MBA, and now is CEO of a healthcare software startup. We get into all that and more, including his advice to doctors that are evaluating a startup for potential investment. You don't want to miss it. Without further delay, here is my talk with Dr. Serban Georgescu. Welcome to another edition of the Doctors Unbound podcast. I am very excited to talk to Dr. Serban Georgescu, a physician who has an international background, and he's now CEO of a healthcare software company. Dr. Serban, welcome to the show.
Well, David, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. I know we're going to get into a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of interesting topics for doctors. I'd like to start with a kind of a new format, something that I'm going to call the top three. So we're going to warm up a little bit, and we'll get to know a little bit more about you. Can you please just give us a little idea about what your morning routine was like today?
Today and any other morning, usually I wake up around 6:15. Dress up quickly, go running as much as I can. If I have time, I run up to an hour, and then come home, quick shower, eat something, and then head to work.
Awesome. So that's pretty typical for you.
It's pretty typical. Obviously, the weekends are a little bit different. I mean,
Sure.
I tend to sleep a little bit longer, and I tend to run a bit longer.
Well, I like the fact that you're getting your exercise in right at the beginning of the day. I think that's so important, just to get it in and know that it's done.
Well, honestly, I started rerunning about 3-4 months ago after a long period of, less running and more walking. But then I thought running was good for me and gives me a lot of energy in the morning. I feel good. I lost some weight, so it's a good way to start the day.
I agree. This is one area that I'm struggling with right now because I need to make exercise more of a daily routine, and I wake up kind of early. I wake up earlier than that for work, unfortunately, as an anesthesiologist, and I haven't brought myself to wake up earlier than 5 to get my workout in the morning, but I got to figure something out because exercise is so important.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. Do you have a favorite food or drink that you can share with us?
Favorite food? Definitely love sushi. I mean,
Yes.
lived in Japan. We may get into that later on, but
For sure.
that opened up my eyes towards a new food, which I think it has become pretty mainstream here now.
Yeah, it is. I live here in a suburb of Dallas, and we definitely have our favorite sushi spot, and that's usually where my wife and I go for dinner when we can get away from the kids for a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's great. I just love sushi, and my daughter does too.
Awesome. And how about this is getting a little bit personal, but how about one thing that's kind of quirky about you that maybe few people know about?
Quirky. I mean, tough to say. I just love travel. I mean, uh,
Okay.
probably I'm gonna spend the last years of my life just traveling. But I started traveling, since a very early age, and then through my, student years, and afterwards, every time I had a bit of money put aside, I spent on travel.
Awesome. And I think one of the questions at the end we're gonna a little bit into maybe a favorite destination. So we'll touch on that a little bit towards the end. Um, you did a lot of your training, your medical training outside of the U.S. You did your medical school in Romania, I believe, and then you did some graduate work in Japan. Can you maybe talk a little bit about those experiences and maybe contrast that with medical education in the U.S.?
Yeah. So as you know, I was born in Romania. I went to medical school there. School is a little bit different there, so there's no 4-year college like here, followed by 4-year medical school. Over there, after high school, you go directly into medical school. It's a 6-year program, longer, quite difficult to get in. But it was interesting. It was fun. Then you also mentioned the other part when I was a graduate student in Japan.
Right.
So at some point, my life became a bit adventurous, and I applied. I got a scholarship from the government of Japan. Went to Tokyo University. I was a research student for a couple of years.
Uh huh.
Uh, Very difficult period of my life, but also a very interesting period, which actually has forced me quite rapidly to mature.
Right.
And
So
I think when I left Japan, I said, well, if I could make it there, I could make it anywhere. You know how it is.
right. So you got to Japan. Did you speak any of the language at all?
When I got there, I knew nothing. I mean, like zero.
Wow.
So, in parallel with my work at the university, I also, for half a year, had to attend language classes. And it was quite interesting because we were treated like kids. I felt like, I don't know, first grade or less than that. Not even that, because kids, when they come to school, at least they know how to speak. I didn't know anything.
Wow.
So basically, some of the very early classes were like pointing at the wall and say, "What's the name?" Pointing at the table and the chair and the lamp. It felt so weird, but it was also very interesting.
How long were you in Japan for, and where was your language skills when you left?
So I was there for 2 years. Went to language school for about half a year, and then actually took advantage in the summer. Of some homestay programs where you go and live with different Japanese families, part of their family. Like I was feeling one of their sons.
Mm-hmm.
Like deep immersion. I went and visited a family literally in the countryside. Other great, very nice families. In the north of Japan. One person was a doctor. Others, somebody else was a priest, had his own temple. So very interesting experience, but that actually forced me to learn Japanese very quickly. It was difficult at the beginning. We had the dictionary in front of us all the time, and then I came back to the university, and our boss at some point, you know, kind of like gave a sign to everybody, stop speaking English to him, um, and that forced me even more. So I learned a lot. I mean, I remember. So I don't want to get too deep into the Japanese language, but they have three alphabets. I could write two of them. I could read and write another 1,000 characters of those complicated Chinese style characters. So I think I was pretty fluent at the time. It's been a long time, but I can still understand maybe up to half of what they speak, and I can still speak some.
Well, it sounds like you came along quite a bit in 2 years.
Yeah, again, situation forces you to adapt, and there was no other choice for me: either adapt or go home. I wasn't going to go home.
And you actually had some time to do some research while you were there.
Days were long. I mean,
Right.
literally, days were long, and I'm not complaining. I mean, long, hard, but it was also a lot of fun.
For
And
sure.
my bosses would never leave before me, so we just left at the same time. Sometime we left the lab even at midnight. So
Is that a cultural thing, or is just everybody was just working hard?
I think everybody was working hard there.
Okay.
I don't know about other universities, but at Tokyo University, I mean, people really, really putting their hours.
Wow. Okay. And was the next stop the United States after that?
Well, I made a quick stop in Romania for a few years,
Mm-hmm.
tried to readapt to the clinical environment. I worked in the cath lab for 2.5 years, but then I really liked research and I wanted to do that. It was tough to do it in Europe.
Right.
So in 1998, I came to Boston and then never left.
Gotcha. And while you were here in the U.S., you also got an MBA, I think.
Yeah, so I did about a decade of research at New England Medical Center. Today is Tufts Medical Center.
Uh huh.
A lot of fun. I mean, I love science, and I could talk science with anybody, starting with, I don't know, about proteins, genetics, molecular biology, whatever you want to do, talk about
Yeah.
animal studies and human studies. So it's very exciting to talk science.
Absolutely.
Uh, but at some point, I became much more interested in the translational part of research because it's fun to do research, but not just research for the sake of research. It has to have a final purpose, right? And that's the patient.
Yep. I agree.
So that's why I decided to go for an MBA, and I went to a great school here in Massachusetts, Babson College, very entrepreneurial. It's been called, I don't know, I think about 20 years consecutively the most entrepreneurial MBA in the country by US News and World Report.
Uh huh. And had a good time there with the education, the entrepreneurial aspect of it.
It was. So it wasn't easy because I took evening classes, so I was still working at the time. Um, it wasn't easy, but I learned a lot. Basically, it opened my mind towards a new type of world. Um, I mean, science is one way, medicine is another part, um, business is different. So I learned obviously about finance and accounting and marketing and strategy, whatever you want to call it. But it opened my mind towards something very different, how to think, the different level, and then the level of networking that I did there, and stayed, made a lot of good friends who are now in various positions, different companies, was also tremendous.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. As far as the networking and the relationships in the healthcare tech space, is that something that you were able to develop there? Or did you have to go elsewhere for that?
Well, partly there. At the time, Babson wasn't that much focused on healthcare and life sciences, although I think that situation has changed gradually over time. So I made some connections and friends there. But after that, I mean, being immersed here also in Massachusetts, which is literally a life sciences hub, excellent schools and research and hospitals. At
Right.
the same time, very strong industry, both on the pharma and diagnostics and medical devices side, and a lot of very savvy investors who invest in this space. So it's a good place to network. Can tell you there were I know weeks where I don't even know when I was coming back in the evening because I was going to so many networking events just to meet people, get their opinion, understand how they think, what kind of jobs they have, what kind of companies they're in, what kind of ideas they have. So with networking, you have to put in the time.
Yeah, it sounds like it was exhilarating though.
It was. So I guess, I don't know, was always a friendly person. Then just to be friendly, to make friends and find out about people and their cultures. This had a bit more of a purpose, just to literally connect and see if there's any possibilities to create something there.
Gotcha. And I don't know if it was the next thing, but I know you were involved with Mass Medical Angels, if I'm saying that correctly.
Hmm.
Can you tell us
Yes.
a little bit about what that is and how that developed?
Yeah. So I was still in the MBA program at Babson um, when someone who's running Mass Medical Angels, gave me a call and asked me that I could actually start applying some of the things that I was learning in class. And I said, absolutely, that would be tremendous for me.
Mm-hmm.
So MA2 is an angel investment group. I don't know, maybe 6, 7, 8 years old or so. Very savvy investors. They focus on early stage life science companies, um, drugs, diagnostics, medical devices, healthcare IT, home healthcare, a lot of interesting opportunities. So basically, they invite companies, present, and then they run some due diligence and make a decision for investment.
Gotcha.
So I've been with them, I think, now for about 6 years or so. I learned a lot, made good friends, met a lot of smart and interesting people, both on the investor side and also on the entrepreneur side.
Mm-hmm. Now, startups, it's kind of in the news a lot these days, and it's kind of a very, very cool topic. But what are maybe some things that physicians don't know about this space that maybe is a little tougher?
Well, I guess from the outside, life in a startup is very glamorous, or
Right.
that's how it sounds, or it sounds exciting. But I can tell you, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of stress, and I know physicians are used to that, right? So there's nothing new there. But it's also a lot of uncertainty. You have to pivot and adapt very quickly. I mean, you start with an idea, you're very excited about the company, about that technology is going to change, maybe some patient's life, or that's what you envision. And then you start going out and talking with potential clients and doctors and hospitals. And suddenly you realize that no one's going to buy your product because maybe there's something better, or you haven't identified the need correctly, or your technology is going to take a lot of time until you get it to the point of sale. Obviously, with healthcare, you have to, in most cases, vast majority of cases, you have to go to the FDA,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people don't know exactly what that means, how long it takes, how much money it costs, how you have to raise that money, which means you have to give up some parts of your company in order to raise money. So, and at the end, you may still not have a company or may not have a product. And, sadly, a lot of startups, many more startups actually fail than are successful. So you have to be prepared for those.
Sounds like, sounds like it's a lot of work, a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of stress.
It is. So basically, you have to to survive for a long time, sometimes with very little resources and more, ambition and smarts and connections. And it's a lot of work. So I forgot recently, sometime I was reading an interesting article. You know how they talk about in Silicon Valley about all these unicorn companies, they do this, they do that, and suddenly they're worth billions and everybody wants to be a unicorn, right?
Right.
And then the article was saying, well, in tough times, yeah, you can be a unicorn, but also fail very quickly as a unicorn, versus maybe you want to be a cockroach. Well, it doesn't matter. It can be an atomic bomb coming onto you, and you're still going to survive and come from your hole after the whole thing has passed.
You got to be that cockroach.
Yeah. So everybody wants to be a unicorn, but it's until you get there, you have to go through tough times.
So until you can be a unicorn, it's good to be a cockroach.
Well, it is what it is. I mean, a lot of work. That's what it
Definitely.
is.
So maybe there are some listeners out there who are never going to get into the startup scene as far as working for one, but maybe they're pitched to be investors because physicians tend to have some cash. What advice or tips maybe can you give to our listeners out there who are looking to do some due diligence on a startup type company?
Well, so first of all, if you're a doctor, I mean, you have some advantage, right? And sure, you can
Right.
invest in anything you want. You can invest in real estate, but let's talk more about, investing in a healthcare company.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, you have some advantage because you have an insight, and you always have to think, who's going to use, is there a need, what is the competition. Sometimes you may still have a great solution and the hospital or the practice won't buy it because maybe they're locked in long-term contracts, and until they're ready to talk with you 3, 4, 5 years down the road, your company may not even exist anymore, right?
Wow. Yeah, that's
So,
true.
so you have to think from on multiple levels. Obviously, one is the technology and the user. So is there a need, and do you have a good solution, and does this solution solve a problem, right? Then
Right.
obviously you have to look at the competition and what else is there on the market. And sometimes it's not necessarily another technology, but it's simply the status quo. So, because we're doctors and doctors are taught to do some things, or they just settle in their own, habits, and then it's very tough to change because we've always done this way, right? So why should I change now? If they don't see an incentive to doing that, then they won't change. So it's going to be an uphill battle for you to sell your product.
Mm-hmm.
So then obviously you have to think, is this product going to be regulated by the FDA or not? And what's going to take? So, I was just reading today an enormous number. Now it says on average to bring a drug to market, it's $2.6 billion, right?
Wow.
So
Yeah.
sure, you can invest as an individual into something that may be a drug, but I wouldn't advise that because that's going to take a lot of money and bigger chances not to succeed, and the company will need a lot of money. You're going to get very diluted. So I think that's difficult for individuals to do. Better consider a medical device, which might be easier and cheaper to bring to market. A diagnostics the same, and something in the healthcare IT, a software for hospitals, for practices, might also be something cheaper. Some of them are not regulated. For example, you can bring a software to the administration of the hospital, which has nothing to do with the FDA. So basically, no clinical trial is needed, no money and time spent on that. And then
Okay.
obviously there are some other aspects you have to think about. You have to think of the intellectual property. Can you protect what you bring there? How much money does the company need to bring the product to market? What are the possible acquirers of the company? And very importantly, is the team the right one to bring it to market and to bring it to a success? Because unfortunately, I've seen a lot of companies, who had a great technology, and that was sadly buried by a team that didn't know what to do with it. And on the other hand, I also saw companies who had an okay technology. I mean, nothing earth-shattering, but at the same time, a very smart team. Adaptable, flexible, knowledgeable, smart, and they were able to pivot and do their best with what they had, and still brought a success in the end to the team and the investors.
Well, I never thought about it that way. Thank you. That was very good.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have that much time, and I don't want to keep you too long. Maybe we can pivot a little bit here and talk a little bit about your latest venture, Notovox. I'm not going to press too much. I know it's still early with the company, but you're CEO of that company, and could you just maybe give our listeners, whatever you're comfortable telling us about that company?
Yeah, sure. So Notovox was founded with a friend of mine and a former colleague from medical school, Dr. Alex Tanase, who's in Phoenix, Arizona. So this is a software for medical coding and billing. And for people who do not know what that is basically, as a patient, you go to a doctor and you get diagnosis, you get procedures, you get labs and others. And for each of these, your doctor needs to assign a medical code, a number, and then submit that to insurance in order to get paid, right?
Right.
So I guess a lot of people know and remember the introduction of ICD-10. So, the new coding system, which came about 2 years ago in 2015. And we know the ICD-9, which had, I think, a total of about 13,000 codes, went to ICD-10, which has over 155,000 codes. So much more difficult to find the right code.
Yeah,
Sure,
it
you can put
exploded.
Yeah, sure. You can put an accurate code, but it's also about granularity because you have a wide range for a certain disease, and you want to be as specific as possible
Uh-huh.
with reimbursement implications there. So we thought, okay, as doctors, how do we code? And doctors do not think in codes. We never learned coding in medical school.
Nope.
Maybe a few have, but I haven't, and I'm sure a lot of others have not. So we don't know codes, but what do we know? We know medical terminologies, right?
Right.
So we can use those to basically talk about any disease and explain anything about any diagnosis that way. So with that in mind, we went and created the software. Alex is actually the inventor of the technology, where we're using medical terms, and we made something very simple for physicians and any other healthcare provider, where they can use these medical terms in an application that is very simple, single screen, just some buttons, all medical terms, and everybody who uses the software um, understands what those buttons are because they hide medical terms, which are very familiar to doctors and healthcare providers. So basically, there's nothing new for you to learn in order to push a few buttons and then define the diagnosis. So we're still at the beginning of the road. The application hopefully is going to be on the market at some point. And we're excited about how this will actually change the world of coding, and actually more than that.
Cool. Well, maybe we can have you on again after it's all out there, and we can talk about it again. Thank you for that explanation.
Sure, absolutely.
We're going to start wrapping it up a little bit. One other question that I had for you. I noticed that you have quite a few sort of advisor or consultant roles that that you have, and I was wondering, how do those relationships come about, and then how do you make time for them? Because like it seems like you're very busy, but how do you kind of juggle all of that?
Well, I guess these relationships were built over time, so I think everything is based on trust.
Right.
And obviously, people need to trust you and need to trust you as a person and need to trust your experience and knowledge in a particular field, uh, which happens to be their field, right? So if they like you, it has to be a good relationship. And if you, I know, bring good advice, uh, you know, there are many type of advice you can bring to a company, and depends on how early or very early or later stage they are. But it's all about how to bring the product to market, or how to build a team, how to introduce it to a client. So it's a lot of possible help that you provide to that company, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
So again, develop these relationships over time with people whom I know, and we have uh, a good relationship, and I think became closer, understood exactly what they did, and then usually start to help them, on a pro bono basis, just to help them get off the ground or move to the next level. So I guess
Mm-hmm.
that increases also strengthens the relationship, and at some point, you can formalize it a little bit.
Gotcha. All right, cool. Well, we're going to start wrapping it up here with some final questions. Um, is there one resource that has benefited you, a resource or a hack that you'd like to recommend and share with the audience?
A resource in what way?
Maybe just something that helps you be more productive or efficient or things like that.
Uh, I don't know. I mean, like I read a lot of books. Honestly, I'm on LinkedIn a lot. So
Okay.
basically, in the morning, I wake up. I read my work emails. I read my personal email, and then third thing I do, I go on LinkedIn to see what different
Well,
people have done.
well, I think that's a good one because I think LinkedIn for professionals has really changed the way people interact, the way people get jobs. Um, it really has changed the professional landscape, I think.
Yes, I agree. So been using LinkedIn, I don't know, since 2008, I think. Long time, but start to like to use it and understand its its value early on. And again, today, I don't know, definitely spent a decent amount of money of time of my time and on LinkedIn, just because a lot of my connections are there, my network. I see how people move. You see trends. You see
Mm-hmm.
interesting postings. So you basically build and continue to maintain your public image. So there's different ways to work LinkedIn into your daily life, right?
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything that you wish you had done differently, or maybe had gone differently in your medical career so far?
Uh, well, at some point, I guess. I was thinking, maybe I should have stayed more in the on the clinical side, but in the end, I don't think I regret anything. I mean, I did what I wanted to do,
Mm-hmm.
what I like to do every single time, and I absolutely loved what I did at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just felt that I needed to add another layer to my education and my background and my, I know, understanding of life uh, and the healthcare space. So I went to another level and another level. And today I'm also extremely happy and I love what I do.
Well,
So
that's awesome. And then I'll kind of take it back to the beginning there, and you mentioned you like to travel. So is there one place that you'd fly to tomorrow if there were no commitments and infinite resources?
Yeah, I would fly to two places. One, I would fly back to Japan to see all my friends there. And this is a perfect time in the fall to visit Japan and to see the foliage. And I absolutely love Tokyo and Kyoto in the fall, the temple. So I would definitely go there tomorrow. And another one is I've never been to Alaska, and I would just love to go there and fish and relax and absorb that wild nature.
Yeah, that's awesome. We haven't done it yet, but we keep talking about maybe doing a cruise from like the Seattle or Vancouver, BC area up to Alaska. Here, they're just beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If I could, I would just jump on a plane tomorrow.
Yeah. And anything else that you'd like to add that we didn't cover?
What should I say? It's just I know that your Doctors Unbound, Library of Podcast. This is kind of like at the beginning of the road, or relatively at the beginning of the road.
Uh-huh.
And I was impressed, listening to the first ones that you realized and posted on the website. So I think it's a great initiative. I understand the need for something like that, especially, for doctors and others who, drive to work, and there's a sizable amount of distance, right, to get there, and you want to fill up your time and you want to be stimulated instead of just sleeping there behind the wheel. But I think you're trying to approach this, from multiple directions, and what I've heard so far, has been interesting and exciting, and I just want to thank you so much for inviting me, to be part of this, and I'm sure it's going to, be part of great success.
Well, thank you so much. I wasn't expecting you to say that, but I really do appreciate it. It's been awesome to launch this podcast. It's kind of scratching my own itch, but kind of talking to my colleagues, I know that there's a need for it out there. And I'm just excited about the awesome people that I've gotten to talk to so far, and share with the audience. Where can people reach you? Where's the best place for people to reach you if they'd like to get in touch with you?
I think probably the easiest way would be to send me an email on LinkedIn. Okay. Even for people who are not on LinkedIn, I think it takes half a minute to join there with just a username and a password. And I respond to all emails unless it's just your spam.
All right, cool. Well, I want to thank you again for being our guest here on this episode of Doctors Unbound.
Well, thank you so much, David. I appreciate the invitation, and wish you nothing but the best with the series of podcasts going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Doctors Unbound podcast. Remember to head over to doctorsunbound.com to access all the show notes and resources discussed in this episode. Now, it's your turn to be unbound.